what we're going to do is take a moment. I'm going to hand over to Jim, and he's going to share with us, first of all, what is business acumen, why it's important for leaders to enhance their fitness in this critical area, and what can be gained by putting more emphasis and focus on business acumen as an organization, and finally, what you can do to measure, manage, and most importantly, execute on a program that allows you to enhance your business acumen fitness towards the goal of improving your strategy execution.
Hi everybody, I'm Jim Grant from Dattner Grant. Thank you for the introduction. Matt, very pleased to be talking to you today about business acumen. It's been an interesting journey for us. We hear the term business acumen floated around in the business lexicon constantly. People talk about it, they measure people against it supposedly. They look at it in the context of performance management, and yet when we explored this we found that it had poor definition. It wasn't able to be measured as a capability, and for the most part when people talked about business acumen they actually talked about financial acumen. So we set ourselves a quest to see if we could define it a little clearer. Is this a thing that's measurable? Can you demonstrate it? Can you evaluate it? And over the course of the last 3 years we've pulled together a tool which we think does that really effectively. So what is it? Well, in simple terms, it's the capacity to both know and demonstrate the key attributes of your role that allow you to succeed in running your business. So what we've got is a measure of 11 capabilities that you will assess yourself and will get your peers and colleagues to assess. That'll give you a really rich picture, a narrative if you like, about what business acumen looks like and importantly what you can do to develop it. We also found that of course when you're looking at particular roles that people's perspective on importance varies. Does your boss think what's important in your role is in the same way that you do and your peers? And so we've seen an emerging dialogue about evaluating what really matters in particular roles, and then in turn, in demonstration in that role, what perspectives are there on that? Do people see what you see? Do people you doing what people think you're doing? And since we get a rich narrative around that. So we've developed 11 capabilities, and briefly, this was done by firstly looking at the extensive literature on business acumen, interviewing a large number of senior business executives and asking the question, what really matters in the context of this big proposition around business acumen? And we came up with 11 capabilities, and we think it's the first comprehensive measure of business acumen. But the best way I think to describe it is to talk about the narrative that sits underneath it, and I'll just spend a minute walking you through that. The first capability is around mindsets, and this is really about how people think, what's going on in their heads as they enter the business world, and it's a very important predisposition and predictor of what people will do in relation to business acumen. Are they thinking creatively? Are they action oriented, for example? We then move into what we call the bigger picture issues. Are business leaders able to show foresight? Do they broad scan? And does that foresight and broad scanning neatly translate into some clever strategic thinking? And if you get those pieces right, you've got a nice entry into the world of business acumen. And of course attached to that is the idea of collaboration. Increasingly we're seeing people with high business acumen being naturally and instinctively collaborative. And of course they have to then attach to that their ability to manage and understand the resources. They have to have good structures and systems and processes that sit alongside that. And in the final analysis, they have to make really robust, thoughtful and appropriate decisions. And if that's not enough, great leaders with terrific business acumen also have to really leverage talent in their organisations. And they have a wider duty of care. They have a responsibility for the current and future generation, and the tool measures that as well. And of course, they have to have extensive financial acumen as well. Do they understand the financials? Do they know the story around financials? And can they really read it and put it in ways that make it applicable and action-oriented? So everybody's business acumen profile conjures up a narrative along those lines. So one of the big questions, of course, is if you don't have high-level business acumen, what does it mean? What does it matter? Is it important? I would say to you, yes, it is critically important. Let me illustrate that to you. If you, for example, are a person that gets right into the action of your business without the appropriate due diligence and thinking behind that, you're likely to really narrow down the propositions that enable your business to be successful. So, for example, if you're making decisions and you haven't scanned the environment appropriately, you haven't got foresight foresight which allows you to look into the distance. If your strategic thinking is thin or vague, then by definition your decision making will be narrow. Allied to that is the idea that having done that thinking, you've got to get your ducks in a row. So people who are poor at business acumen can do all of that stuff, and then they don't put the resources and systems in place to make it work and effective. And so these things tend to merge into oneness. Likewise, it's quite common, and we found this early on in our research, that the lowest rated capability consistently in the 1,000 or so we've done so far is in the capacity of leaders to manage talent. And it would seem like the bleeding obvious, but all that stuff is well and good, but if you're not collaborative and you're not managing talent, then your capacity to leverage all of that internal acumen is severely limited, and Matt referred to that in the leadership context earlier on. And then at the end of the day, of course, we see leaders with poor business acumen stuck in the moment. That is, they don't see themselves as having a stewardship responsibility to take the organisation into its future. So people with poor business acumen either have bits of that puzzle, or none of it, or the wrong combination. And so what the tool does is it says, here's a snapshot of what's important in your role and what you're actually demonstrating, and multiple perceptions around that, so that you've got a capacity to actually develop the capabilities that are required for a specific role. We're also able to measure it for the team, for the division, for the geography in any way, shape or form, so you can get an organisational picture as well. And ultimately that leads to a development program that supports it. So the tool itself, it's a 360 tool. It allows you to assess for yourself your ability against each of those 11 capabilities, and within each of them there is a significant number of specific behaviours that aggregate to represent that capability. In turn, your manager will make a similar assessment, and peers that you choose to be involved in it, and direct reports as well. So it's a very comprehensive, multi-phased rating system. They will be asked to look at importance in the role first of all. How valuable is this particular attribute? And that's done for the capability in a broad sense, but for the layers below, the very vivid definition of each of those capabilities. So does it matter? Is it important in your role? What does your boss think? What do you think? What do your peers think? And so on. And then it asks you what demonstration is apparent. What are you actually showing in that role? And then we juxtapose those two perspectives to say, well, I think it's important, but here is what I'm actually demonstrated in a high-level way and a granular way. So you get a substantial amount of data presented in multiple forms that will give you a very rich picture, and in turn a story or a narrative about what your business acumen looks like. So in short, does this matter? Do I demonstrate it? Who cares? And what do I need to do about it? So of course at the end of this you have a development tool. You have a vivid description of your strengths and weaknesses. And so for strengths, obviously we would be arguing they're things that need to be leveraged. And we don't say that lightly, because too often people don't value their strengths sufficiently. And things to be leveraged are enormous personal assets and advantages to your organisation. So where are the capacities that you bring to the organisation that can be advantageous to you and your organisation and its leadership? So understanding what they are. So when you're at the executive table, here's a strength that the organisation would play to. Your limitations, of course, are areas to develop, and they will be highlighted in a number of ways. First of all, the possible misalignment between what you think is important and your boss thinks is important is an area of conversation, but also an area of development, because it gives clarity to the role. And we all know that clarity is the entry point to high engagement. So if you're not clear on the role and you're not aligned in that with your boss and your peers, then you're going to get a fractured response to what's responsible. In turn, your weaknesses will be highlighted so that you can actually develop them. So for instance, if you're limited in financial acumen, of course there are a lot of ways that you can work on that. There's developmental courses, there's conversations with people with higher acumen. It's important to say, though, that there is no expectation in this tool that you're a superstar at every one of these things. So from a development perspective, the question is, are you developing the things that matter in your role? And so we imagine, and we've seen, that we get very constructed and focused development plans emerging from this tool, very tailored to 2 or 3 capabilities, because they're required in the role, because they're important in the role, and because their demonstration are key success factors to you doing the job you need to do. We often get asked what the relevance of this tool is beyond the corporate world, and of course the answer to that is perhaps not surprisingly highly relevant. We've run it in the public sector in a significant way, and we found that the capabilities are not only relevant, but they represent a significant challenge. And what I mean by that is that quite often in public sector environments there's an even narrower definition of business acumen. But when you really pursue the issue along those 11 capabilities, you find that all of them are relevant. The tool also has the capacity to talk about issues which are not relevant or not observed. So built into it is the ability to say, well, actually that particular attribute or a component of attribute is not useful in this environment. But our experience in the public sector is great dialogue has emerged from a widening lens on what's required to run successful organisations, and frankly it's not greatly different to the commercial world. So it's elicited some really incredible conversations about broadening perspective in the public sector. So why do all of this? I'd say three things. I mean, firstly, if you're talking about business acumen at all in your organisation, are you doing so loosely? Are you able to define it clearly? Are you able to measure it? Are you able to bring it into your performance management structures? Are you able to have robust conversations about it? And if the answer to any of those questions is no, then this tool will enable you to not only measure it, but have great conversations about it. The second thing about it is that for a leadership team to know what your strengths are and your limitations are, given your strategic goals, this is a very important way of knowing what you need, where you need to fill the gaps. What attributes can you leverage, what are your limitations, and what you can do about it. Thirdly, when you're getting down to the hard nuts and bolts of assessing career opportunities, performance management, succession planning, we talk about this stuff all the time, and yet we don't measure it. So when you're getting to that pointy end around careers and development, to have a tool that actually says we've now got a robust definition, an assessment of importance, and the ability to know what is demonstrated as a mechanism to make some very grounded, sensible decisions about people's prospects in the future, this tool can do all of that for you.